That's a really good way of just creating multiple narratives and really valuing the different the diversity in your classroom. So depending on where pupils in your classroom come from, focusing on what they actually know. And in the English curriculum in secondary school, you've got reflective writing, creative writing, where you can really give them an opportunity to explore their identities and parts of their identities that might not be valued. But also with creative writing, gives you a chance to explore ways of creating empathy for marginalized people that some of the pupils in your classroom might not usually be able to empathize with because of the lack of narratives that humanize them. And perhaps that's a good way. This is a good time to look at the next slide, this idea of decoloniality as a humanizing force. So I guess I can read it out. If coloniality refers to logic, metaphysics, ontology, and a matrix of power that can continue existing after formal independence and desegregation, decoloniality refers to efforts at rehumanizing the world, to breaking hierarchies of difference that dehumanize subjects and communities and that destroy nature, and to the production of counter-discourses, counter-knowledges, counter-creative acts, and counter-practices that seek to dismantle coloniality and to open up multiple other forms of being in the world. And I think that the idea of humanizing narratives is so important, because when you get people to do some creative writing, or you find text that you think, oh, there's a representation of a Black person, so this is going to be a good text. Actually, you need to think about the representation that is in that text. So is the representation humanizing? Does that person of color, the Black person in the book, actually have agency? Do they have a voice, or are they being portrayed through the white gaze? So is it through a white person's perception that can actually dehumanize? Do they have agency over their story? Do they have a voice? Is it written by a person of color? We should really be thinking about that. So very often people might look at, for example, To Kill a Mockingbird as an anti-racist text, but actually it's written by a white person and is narrated by white people, and there's no real sense of Black people's agency. So Black people are always seen by a white person, and they're contextualized by a white person, and they're hardly ever given a voice, and that really makes it easy to dehumanize them, but also portray them as victims that need to be saved. So thinking about the power dynamics within a story, whether it's through creative writing of a pupil or a text that you're teaching, we always need to be critical of the sort of the savior narratives, for example, and how those can be questioned. Doesn't mean you don't have to teach the text, but they need to be critically questioned and perhaps repaired. So if there's that agency that's missing, or that story, that voice that's missing, get your pupils to imagine that voice through creative writing, to recreate that agency. So for example, when I taught a bit of Ian Crichton-Smith, one of the Scottish set texts, the short story is called Home, and that basically looks at a white Scottish man who lived in South Africa. He comes back to Glasgow, and he makes some comments about Black people in South Africa, and it's very dehumanizing. The reader is supposed to see that he's got racist assumptions about Black people, but there's no actual voice of a Black person in that story. And it can be really uncomfortable as well for pupils, especially Black pupils, if you have any in your classroom, to face those stories where you see Black people being dehumanized and nothing really being done about it. So it's important to think about counter-representations, counter-narratives that can challenge those racist assumptions and actually help pupils empathize, but also think more critically about the